Welcome to the explanation of the Diploma Stage 2 Mix and Match Development Cluster Assessments. This is a recording of a workshop that was run on the 19th of March explaining how the assessment works.
So we are covering the co-assessment for the 4 units CHCECE017, 018, 022 and 023. They are listed on your assessment document. 17 is foster holistic development, 18 is nurture creativity, 22 is promote children's agency, and 23 is analyse information. So basically 17 is the unit that is about children's development. 18 is the unit about creativity. 22 is about fostering children's ability to do things themselves, agency. And 23 is the observation unit. The assessment does cover all 4 units. All TAFE assessments are broken into 2 sections. We have an off-the-job component and we have an on-the-job or workplace component. Okay? It is really important, particularly with these units, that you complete the off-the-job component and hand it to your tutor for marking before you do the on-the-job, the workplace components. That's because we need to give you feedback on the tasks that you've done before you do them again in work placement. The work placement tasks are very similar, although they're with a different age group. We need to know that you're on the right track with your observations, your interpretations and your summaries and your planning before you do it again on placement. If you do it all and hand it to your tutor teacher and you haven't got the interpretations right, you have to do it all again. And that's not something anyone wants to do. So by doing the off-the-job component first, handing it to your tutor, getting feedback on it, getting it marked, then you know whether or not you have to change things before you do the on-the-job, or whether you're on the right track and you can just do the on-the-job component. If you're working in a service, you don't have to wait for crack time. But during these units in particular, I want your tutor to visit you. When you're completing or about to complete these units, this is the point in time in which I want your tutor to be visiting you. When you're implementing some of the last parts of this on the workplace assessment. So it's really important you maintain that contact as well with your tutor. The task 1 is based preferably on a child aged 0 to 3. Now this is where we get flexible. If you work in the 0 to 3 room on a regular basis, then I want you to base 1 and 2's tasks on a child who's in the 3 to 5 room. The reason for that is that you are more likely to want to do your prac tasks on children in your room, in the room that you work in on a regular basis. So whichever room you're in, if you're in 0 to 2 or 2 to 3, base task 1 and 2 on 3 to 5-year-old children. If you're in a 3 to 5 room, base tasks 1 and 2 on a 0 to 2 or a 2 to 3. To complete 5 observations, you must do different observation types. I'm going to go through the different observation types today. That's one of the things I do want to focus on. All of your interpretations must be interpreted based on developmental theory and the EYLF. One of the things that we notice is that the expectation of developmental theory in a service observation is different to what is expected at TAFE. So this is important that you put in TAFE expectation, not just what you do in a service. Your theory does need to be quite detailed. Then then you write a summative assessment, and the summative assessment is only based on 5 observations, so it's not an enormous document. And I've got examples of everything. The second assessment task links to the first. It's the planning. So from your observations, you will have possible follow-up suggestions. You plan and implement 4 of them. So you'll plan it, and you do need to use the TAFE planning format. Again, this is to meet the government requirements. One of the plans needs to extend across more than one day. You have to plan for the 4 different areas: dramatic play, construction, visual arts, music and movement, because that's needed to meet the requirements for 18 and 22. And you have to show outcomes that will develop specific skills within those areas. So dramatic play, your outcomes need to show development of skills that would be evident in dramatic play. So cooperative play, associative play, turn-taking, sharing, emotional, social type skills, visual arts. I've got some more information on that, and music and movement. So now we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty. Okay, this is breaking these tasks down even more into the really, really specific stuff. Some of you will be quite familiar with different types of observations. You'll have completed different types of observations in Certificate 3. What you need to remember as we move through Diploma is that Certificate 3 level here is here. Diploma level steps up a level. Diploma 2, Diploma level step 3 steps up even more. So what you wrote as a Certificate 3, whether you're a trainee or something else, is not the same level of observation that we will expect now. We expect a higher level now, and then when we move to Diploma 3, I expect a higher level again, because we're stepping up the ladder. There will be differences between what your service does and what we cover. There has to be, because what we cover is the groundwork that services kind of take and then discard and only do what suits them. Some of your services will use online observation tools. Some of them will focus on one method of observation. Some of your services will just do group observations only. The National Quality Standard is quite flexible as to how we observe children. The training packages that we're training you to and assessing you on are not so flexible. So we have to do the more specific things. And we have to show the range across the 0 to 5. This is a slide that shows you all of the different possible types of observations. We're not covering all of them. You've got narrative observations, which is your anecdotes, your jottings, your learning stories. Those 3 we do focus on. You've got your sampling, time and event samples, which is a good idea to know about because you need them when you do the behaviour unit, 020. Language sample, which we do, and a work sample, which we do. We don't really do any of the time and motion sociograms or running records, study type ones. Charting, I do mention them today, but not very much. And then technology, videos and audios, and photographs, which photographs we actually combine in with learning stories anyway. Now you have a handout that gives you examples of the different types of observations. It starts off with an anecdotal record, and there are examples of each of the different observation types that I'm going to talk about. You'll notice as I start, I'm not referring to any interpretation yet. All I'm referring to at the moment is how the observation is written, then I'll go back and do the interpretation. Anecdotes are fairly standard. Past tense, because you're writing up after you saw it. A story, beginning, middle and end, but fairly detailed. You need to put the detail in the story. You also need to be careful in the story that you're writing that you write what you see. So when you see a child picking up a pen and holding it like this, you're writing that they picked up a pen and held it, or like this, in their whole hand. You don't write in your story that they held the pen in their palmar grasp. Because palmar grasp is an interpretation. That's the bit you know. What you saw was them hold the pen in their whole hand. Or describe it with their whole hand wrapped around the paintbrush. The interpretation column is for what you know about that skill. It is a narrative. A narrative is a story. So you have an example there of an anecdote on Olivia. If you read it, you will see that it is quite detailed. Olivia was standing at a low table. She had a pop-up toy in front of her. Can you picture it at the moment? Yes, this is the important thing. Olivia turned to her carer, put her arms up near her shoulders, palms up, and babbled, "Oh, Dida!" She pursed her lips together and then laughed out loud, turned back to the toy. Olivia used her right pointer finger to press the yellow triangle button down. A toy popped up and Olivia turned her head towards the carer and made a surprised sound. "Wah!" Olivia turned back to the toy and used the same finger to push the toy down. Then turned back to the carer, put her arms up in the air, palms up again, saying, "Da-dee-dee." She babbled a few more sounds and repeated "da-dee" while moving her arms up and down in the air a little bit. Olivia then babbled, "ah-dee-dee," smiled, and pressed the yellow triangle with her left finger again. As the toy popped up, Olivia startled a little bit and exclaimed, "Ah!" with a surprised look on her face. Olivia smiled at her carer again, then pushed the pop-up toy a few more times with her finger on her left hand. She pushed it down and smiled at the carer, then shook her head and went away. Can you picture that happening in your head? That is the sign of a good anecdote. The sign of a good observation is if your tutor can read your story and picture what happened. Jottings are mini anecdotes. They focus on one area of development. So pick an area: gross motor, fine motor, language, cognitive, I don't mind, and do a series of 3 small observations over a period of a couple of days only. Don't wait, do one, then wait 6 weeks and do another one, because the way children are, the skills that they will develop in 6 weeks are enormous. So we've got mini anecdotes, usually 3 or 4 sentences at the most. They're on the same developmental area. They're written in the past tense. They have to show something significant. Okay. It is not significant to write about a 4-year-old walking from one side of the room to another. Why is that not significant? Why is it not important? Because we expect them to be able to do it. If you've got a 9-month-old walking across the room, that's significant, that's important. But 20 months, 3, 4 walking, unless there's a developmental issue, it's not significant. So you've got to observe significant events. And again, describe what the child did. Try and put as much detail into that little bit that you've got. So you've got 3 examples of Samira. She's playing in the same setting each time. That is not necessarily needed. You can have different settings. I'd like you to focus on the area of development more than the setting. So these ones we've picked up emotional development. The next example is learning stories. A learning story is a little bit more of a relaxed narrative. You still want to put in the detail, but it doesn't have to have the exact detail that an anecdote does. So you don't need to refer to
left hand with thumb and forefinger, or stepped up the step with the left foot and then up the next step with the right foot. It doesn't need quite that detail. A learning story is a little bit more relaxed. It does have photos, and you can use the photos to provide additional evidence for the story that you're telling. But it still needs to tell a story. A good learning story will have a nice catchy title. It will be something that the family wants to actually read. It can focus on a group of children. One of the big differences too between learning stories and anecdotes. Anecdotes, we really prefer one child only. Other children can feature in it, can be in it, but are not the focus. Whereas a learning story, you can observe 2 or 3 children engaging in an experience, and then you can pull out interpretations for 3 different children. So in the example that you've got 3 children. You've got Alex, Omar, and Hannah. Now, I have only interpreted this, if you turn over, for Alex. I only interpreted this for Alex. But if I was working in a service, I would interpret this for Omar and Hannah as well. And if I was creating portfolios for them, the same story would go in 3 children's portfolios, and the only difference would be that their interpretations would be different. Because the story can focus generally on on a group of children and their interaction. So you'll get more social sides of interpretation. The other thing with learning stories is that this becomes learning stories, and group learning stories in particular become the focus of number 3. So it's a good idea to start looking at this, because this becomes the focus of where we move to in diploma stage. The next type is the language sample or the language transcript. Same thing. Now, a language transcript is classed as a sampling observation because you are sampling the child's language. So a language transcript is a difficult observation to do because you need to be very exact in writing down what the child said. My recommendations for doing this are that you do a very short conversation, maybe only a couple of minutes. Try and video or at least audio record. If you've got a smartphone with a recording app, try and record what the child says so you can go back and transcribe it later, because it's very difficult to sit and have a conversation with a child and then remember what they said and how they said it. Because in a language transcript, you do need to record if they make sound errors. So if they say dare instead of there, or whiff instead of with. So it's important to know when those sounds develop, and it's important to record that so that you're looking at whether or not the child has age-expected sound errors or not, whether they're making sound errors for sounds they should have developed by now. This is the example that you have of a language transcript. This is a different Olivia, by the way. She's only 2.5, and when you read her language, it's quite advanced for a 2.5-year-old. Now you can see here that when it's been recorded, her words, this has been put in, but then the word that she means has been put in brackets. This one is hard for me, Daddy. I'm writing bout, so she's dropped the AU, and me and Livy and Mum and Dad, and Mummy and Simon and Adrian and Anne and William, not William, and Annie and Lee. This is important too.
because all of it allows you to interpret her language at the stage that she's at and look at not only her language skills but her cognitive skills as well. So when you're writing language transcript, the detail is important, and it is one of the ones you have to do. Work samples are the next sampling type of observation. You have a sample work sample here as well. A work sample is where you take a copy of, a photo of, a photocopy, or a picture of a child's work and analyse the work. You have to be able to watch them doing it. You can't just analyse it after the fact. So you can't go to your art rack, go, oh, that looks cool, put the painting down and write a work sample on it. You have to see the child doing the piece of work. It does not have to be visual arts. It can be block construction. It can be Lego. It can be Play-Doh. It can be any type of fine motor activity, Mobilo. It can be drawing, but it needs to be something where there is a product at the end that the child has created. It doesn't have to be recognisable. It doesn't have to be that the child can say, I drew this, but there has to be something that you can take a photo of as the end product of what the child has created. So you'll see in the example work sample that I've given you, I've just put the little picture in down the bottom. You would normally have a separate page and have it a lot bigger than that. When you're writing the story, you're not interpreting. So you're writing what you see, how they hold the paintbrush, how they hold the pencil, how they pick up the blocks, what language they use. The story tells the story of how he drew the picture. Even without the picture, you would be able to have a picture in your head what it looked like. But the picture supports that. The picture gives us that extra information. So when you're writing the work sample, you're focusing on the creativeness of the child doing something. Now, for the purposes of this assessment task, I suggest you do a child either drawing or painting, because you need the creative interpretation. So if you focus your observation on either drawing or painting, you will get the ability to interpret the creative development. Whereas if you do construction of blocks or Lego, you won't get that creativity, the elements of creativity nearly as much. Also, please try and focus on free choice experiences. If you hand in a work sample where a child has coloured in a colouring in sheet, you won't get a competent result. It needs to be a free choice experience. They can be invited to come and do the experience, but they can't be told what to draw, what to paint, or how to do it. They have to choose that for themselves. Charting observations, checklists and rating scales are the two charting observations. There are some fairly chronic problems with using checklists and rating scales, the first of which becomes the desire to test a child, where you have a table set up with a whole lot of experiences. The child comes down and you say, right, do that puzzle, stack this, do that, write your name, draw this, and you sit there and you mark off whether they can or not. You are achieving a checklist, but you're achieving it in a circumstance that is not play-based, and you will not get accurate results. The main difference between the two, they are both lists of developmental skills in developmental order, in developmental areas. They should be clear and logical, okay? They should be written in positive terms, meaning you are marking what a child can do, not what a child can't do. The main difference is that a checklist is a tick. Yes, the child can do the skill. Nothing else. Rating scale allows you to decide how well a child is achieving a skill. It's you to judge the child's skill. And you can use, say, a scale from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, where 1 is basically they're not, to 5 is they're amazingly brilliant. Or you can use words like emerging, age-appropriate, and well-developed. So now we're going to get into the second part, the nitty-gritty of it, which is probably the harder bit, is the interpretations. An observation without an interpretation is like having a bar of chocolate but just looking at it. It's not worth it. It's not worth having a bar of chocolate if you don't eat it. So when we interpret an observation, we are making judgments and we are interpreting based on our knowledge of development, developmental norms, theory, what is age appropriate and expected for a child of that age. Which is why it's really important to know the development in the first place. That's where your Foster Holistic Development Unit comes in. 017, that's the unit about the developmental, how development happens. So that's the unit that needs to be read because that's what's going into your interpretations. The writing of the observations is 023, the interpretations is 017. So you need to have read the information in those units. It's really important that you interpret the skills that the child is seeing. So we decode, we extract the information that we've written and we decode the important information and we write it into our interpretation. When you're observing them, start by writing your observation. Get a pencil or a highlighter or something and go through what you've written and highlight or underline what you think is significant for that child at the age that they are. Important. Like I said before, we don't worry if the child is 4 and walking across a room, but we do if the child is 9 months old. One is significant, one is not. So find the significant skills that the child is doing in the observation and just underline them to start with. Then go back, look at what you've underlined and think, what area of development is that? Is it cognitive? Is it language? If it's language, what part of language is it? Is it expressive language or receptive language? If it's cognitive, what cognitive skills is the child showing? It's not enough at Diploma Stage 2 level to just say showing cognitive skills. You have to break it down. Showing cognitive skills of problem solving and then explain what they're doing. So you need to know what the different cognitive skills are. Showing memory. Is it recall memory or recognition memory? And that's where the notes come into play. That's also where textbooks come into play. It is really important that you don't just rely on the notes from TAFE or Dr. Google. You need to look at the development and think, do I know a theorist that this relates to? So if the child is engaging in an experience and you've written an observation about an older child helping a younger child do a puzzle, then you've written about the older child using their problem-solving skills to assist the younger child, but you've also written about that older child being a peer model and scaffolding the younger child, which is Vygotsky's theory. If you write an observation and you're talking about a child's pre-operational skills, you look up Piaget. If you're talking about a baby who is showing signs of separation anxiety and settles when going to a familiar carer, we can look at Erikson and trust versus mistrust because they're developing trust in a familiar carer. For an older child, we've got Erikson has trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shame and doubt, and initiative versus guilt. They're the three that occur in the period from about 0 to 5. So you can be looking at what is the child doing that falls into Erickson's theory. Under language, there are some theories. So Vygotsky has bits of language in his theory. How many of you have heard a child sitting at a table drawing and talking to themselves but talking out loud? You know, so I'm going to put his hands over here, and they do it in blocks. They do it all the time. Vygotsky calls that private speech, where they're actually talking their thoughts. And as they get older, those thoughts sometimes then end up just in their head. Some people never get out of private speech. There are other parts of language. We have holophrase and telegraphic speech, where children holophrase, where they say car, and it might mean there's a car, I want a car, I saw a car, Daddy's gone in the car. It could mean a million things, but holophrase is a single word. And telegraphic speech is when a child uses a couple of, like a headline, you know, Daddy car. Does that mean I saw Daddy's car? Daddy's gone in the car. Here comes Daddy's car. That looked like Daddy's car. I want to go and crash Daddy's car. It could mean a million things. But they leave out all the little words, so we have to decipher what they mean. Those are the skills that we expect in your interpretation.